the sun rose gently over Oyo town, casting a golden glow on the red earth and the tall iroko trees that lined the narrow paths. The cries of hawkers filled the morning air. Buy your roasted yam here. And the sound of pestles pounding yam echoed from distant compounds. In the midst of this lively rhythm lived a girl named Tolani, the child who knew more of mockery than of laughter. Tolani was unlike the other maidens of Oyo, where they were plump, light-skinned, and adorned with waist beads that jingled proudly as they walked. Tolani was dark, her skin the color of polished ebony, and thin, with limbs that the villagers often compared to broomsticks. Whenever she passed, whispers trailed her like stubborn shadows. See her legs like palm fronds shaken by the wind. Her face looks like roasted bushmeat. She is too black, too skinny. Who will ever marry her? The name bushmeat stuck to her like stubborn dye. Children sang it in the streets, young women giggled it at the stream, and men at the palm wine joint muttered it with laughter. At first, she tried to fight back with words, but the more she resisted, the louder they mocked. In time, she chose silence, carrying her pain like a calabash filled with stones. Yet Tolani had something no one else in Oyo possessed: her voice. It was not just a voice, but a river of honey, smooth and rich, flowing from the depths of her soul. At dawn, when she fetched water at the stream, she sang softly. At dusk, when pounding yam with her mother, she hummed melodies that soothed even the restless goats tied near the compound. Only her mother, Aya Tolani, truly valued that gift. "My daughter," she often said while tying her wrapper tightly across her waist. "The child the world mocks will carry a good name before God." But Tolani always lowered her eyes. What use was a sweet voice when the whole town believed she was ugly? One hot afternoon, at the stream of Afin Oyo, the other maidens gathered, as they always did, laughing, gossiping, and showing off their beauty. Tolani came with her clay pot balanced carefully on her head. She bent to scoop water. Her wrapper faded, her hair tied loosely, when one of the village girls, Sade, sneered and shouted loud enough for all to hear. "Look at her! Bushmeat has come to wash her bones in the river." The others burst into cruel laughter. Some clapped their hands and mimicked her thin walk, their anklets jingling as they mocked. Tolani's cheeks burned, but she said nothing. Instead, she lowered her pot, filled it, and quietly began to hum a tune low and sorrowful, like the cry of a flute in the night. For a moment, the stream stilled. Even the girls who mocked her paused, because though they would never admit it, her voice touched something deep inside them. But pride made them laugh louder. "Sing, bushmeat, sing for us, so hunters can come and roast you." Tolani kept walking, her clay pot steady on her head, her song rising in the air. She sang not for them, but for herself, for the broken smile she carried, for the shame she hid, and for the dream buried in her heart. That night, under the moonlit sky, she sat outside her mother's hut and sang again. The night breeze carried her song beyond the compound walls, across the forest path and into the distance. She didn't know it, but her voice had begun a journey that would soon change her life forever. In the king's palace, word had spread that a foreign prince was visiting Oyo for hunting and trade. The town buzzed with excitement. The maidens oiled their skins, plaited their hair with cowries, and whispered of how one of them might catch his attention. But in Tolani's small world, where mockery drowned dreams, such thoughts never entered her mind. She was bushmeat. That was all anyone saw, yet destiny, like the drumbeat of a sacred talking drum, was already sounding her name. The rooster crowed long before dawn, its call cutting through the silence of Oyo town. From every corner, smoke began to rise as women lit their fires, preparing yam porridge and pap. Children's laughter filled the compounds, but in Tolani's home, the morning began quietly, almost tenderly. Her mother, Iya Tolani, moved about with calm grace, her wrapper tied firmly as she stirred a pot of ogi. She watched her daughter from the corner of her eye, thin, dark-skinned Tolani, sitting by the doorway, softly humming a song while weaving palm fronds into a mat. Her voice, even in the simplest hum, had the power to wrap around the heart like a mother's embrace. "Tolani," her mother called gently, "why do you hide your teeth when you sing? Your smile is beautiful, let it shine." But Tolani lowered her eyes, forcing a small smile that vanished as quickly as it came. It was the smile of someone who had learned to laugh without joy, to pretend even when her heart was breaking. She had been mocked for so long that even her laughter carried the weight of shame. When she walked through the market streets, carrying palm oil to sell, the jeers always followed. "Bushmeat is here. Who will buy from her? Careful. Don't let her shadow spoil your goods." The words pierced her soul like thorns. Yet, instead of crying in public, Tolani held her head high, her clay pots balanced firmly, her smile stitched weakly onto her lips. Only when she returned home at night did the tears come, silent rivers she hid from the world. Sometimes children from nearby compounds would creep close, drawn by her voice. They never admitted it openly, but her singing calmed their restless hearts. One evening, when the moon hung bright and round, a little boy whispered to his sister, "She sounds like the birds in Oramian forest." But the girl quickly shushed him, afraid of being laughed at for praising Tolani. Despite the mockery, Tolani's mother never gave up hope. She often reminded her, "My child, the one people say has no stool, God himself will give a throne." Tolani wanted to believe those words, but each day the laughter grew louder and her heart grew heavier. It was on one of these heavy days that something unusual happened. Tolani had gone to the stream late in the afternoon, hoping to avoid the other maidens. With her clay pot beside her, she began to sing a soft, sorrowful song about a bird who had no nest. Her voice floated over the water, carried by the breeze into the forest beyond. She closed her eyes, pouring her pain into every note. What Tolani did not know was that she was no longer alone. Not far away, A young prince from across the Niger, visiting Oyo with his guards for hunting, had paused when the song reached his ears. He had never heard anything like it, sweet yet sorrowful, fragile yet strong. It was as though the voice carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. "Who sings like this?" he asked, his eyes wide. His guards shrugged, but curiosity pushed him forward. Step by step, he followed the sound until he reached the edge of the stream. There she was, skinny, dark, bent over her pot, singing as though her heart might break. The prince's breath caught in his chest. She was not like the maidens in his palace, painted in beauty and dripping with jewels. No, this one was raw, unpolished. But her voice was a crown more precious than gold. But the moment Tolani lifted her head and saw him his fine clothes, the gleam of his guard's spear's fear gripped her. Her heart raced, not from admiration, but from shame. What if he laughed too? What if he called her bushmeat, just like the others? Before the prince could take another step, Tolani turned and fled, her clay pot slipping from her hands and crashing onto the stones. She ran barefoot through the narrow paths, tears stinging her eyes, until she disappeared into the shadows of Oyo town. The prince stood by the stream, stunned, his heart still tangled in the threads of her song. "Find her," he commanded his guards. "Find the girl with that voice. I must see her again." But Tolani was already gone, clutching her broken smile in the dark, unaware that her destiny had just shifted. The news spread through Oyo like harmattan fire. A foreign prince had arrived in the king's palace with his entourage. He had come, they said, to hunt in the great forests of Oyo and to discuss trade with the king. The town buzzed with excitement, and the maidens buzzed louder still. Girls oiled their skins with palm kernel oil until they glistened like the morning sun. They braided their hair with cowries, tied colorful wrappers, and whispered into one another's ears. Who knew? Perhaps the prince would notice them. Perhaps destiny would lift one of them from the dust of Oyo to the glory of a royal court far away. But in the heart of the king's palace, the prince's mind was not on trade or even on the mighty elephants of Oyo's forests. His thoughts were filled with one thing, the voice he had heard at the stream. A voice that had reached into his soul and refused to let go. That night, seated before the king and his chiefs, the prince spoke carefully. "I heard a song in your town," he said. "A voice sweeter than any I have known. I must find the one who owns it." The palace grew quiet. The king raised his brows. A voice? In Oyo, there are many maidens with voices. Our daughters sing at festivals, at weddings, at the market. How will you know the one you seek? The prince smiled faintly. When I hear her again, I will know. A song like that cannot be mistaken. It was like the wind itself was singing. Word of this conversation flew out of the palace like a mischievous bird. By morning, the entire town was laughing about it. Can you imagine? Sade, the boldest of the maidens, clapped her hands in mock amusement. A prince came from far away, and all he wants is a singer. Let him come and hear us. Our voices are sweeter than honey." They gathered at the stream that evening, raising their voices in playful competition. Each girl sang louder than the other, hoping to catch the ear of the palace guards who lingered nearby. Meanwhile, Tolani remained hidden in the corner of her mother's hut, her broken clay pot pushed aside. She had not told anyone what happened at the stream, not even Iya Tolani. Her heart still raced whenever she remembered the prince's face and the gleam of his guards' spears. She could almost still hear his voice commanding, "Find her." But fear chained her down. She knew what the people thought of her. They called her bushmeat, mocked her skin, laughed at her body. If the prince discovered who she was, would he not laugh too? She couldn't bear it, yet she could not stop singing. Each night, when the moonlight spilled over the thatched roofs of Oyo, her voice rose softly into the air. It was her only release, her only prayer. She sang of sorrow, of dreams buried deep, of hope that flickered even in darkness. And like before, her voice traveled beyond the huts, over the walls, through the forest. The prince, restless in the king's guest chambers, heard it again. He rushed to the balcony, his heart pounding. "There, that is the voice! She's near!" The guards leapt to their feet, but by the time they reached the narrow paths of Oyo, the song had faded like smoke into the night. Only echoes remained. The next day, whispers grew even louder. "This prince is bewitched," the women said. "How can he talk of voices when there are maidens as fine as carved ivory?" The girls laughed cruelly, tossing their braids over their shoulders. "He will find his singer, but it won't be bushmeat. No prince could ever want her, but fate is a stubborn drummer. No matter how the villagers mocked, the rhythm of destiny beat on, steady and certain." That night, as Tolani sat outside, weaving palm fronds and humming softly, her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "Tolani," she said gently, "the child the world rejects, God will lift. Do not hide your song. It was given to you for a reason." Tolani blinked back tears. "But Mama, they laugh at me. Even if the prince hears me, he will join them. What if my voice is all I have, and it is not enough?" Her mother smiled, her eyes shining in the firelight. "Then sing louder, my child, for one day your song will silence every laugh." And so she sang again, her voice carrying into the night like the voice of the wind, unseen, untouchable, but impossible to ignore. The king's palace was a world of its own, high mud walls rising proudly against the skyline of Oyo, its courtyards bustling with drummers, dancers, and the steady rhythm of tradition. Here, chiefs gathered in flowing akbadas. Wives of the king moved gracefully with beads clinking on their ankles, and visitors from far lands bowed in awe at the grandeur of Oyo's king. At the evening council, the king leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the restless foreign prince. "Tell me again," the king said, "about this voice that troubles your spirit. You speak of it more than of elephants, more than of trade, more than of marriage alliances." The court erupted in laughter. But the prince's face remained solemn. He bowed slightly before speaking. Kabiyesi, forgive my persistence, but I tell you the truth. There is a girl in your town with a voice like no other. I heard it at the stream and again in the night. That voice, he paused, searching for words. That voice carries the pain of the earth and the hope of the heavens. It cannot belong to just anyone. The chiefs exchanged curious glances. Some chuckled, others frowned. One scoffed openly. Voices are many in Oyo, my prince. Perhaps it was the wind itself you heard. But the king raised a hand, silencing the room. He turned to his messengers. Send word to the maidens of Oyo. Tomorrow they shall gather in the palace courtyard. Let them sing for our guest. Perhaps the voice he seeks will reveal itself. The news spread faster than palm oil on hot yam. By dawn, the entire town was buzzing. The maidens of Oyo polished their beads, rubbed shea butter into their skins, and rehearsed songs that had been sung for generations. Each believed she might be the one to catch the prince's eye. At the stream, however, the laughter was sharper than ever. Bush meat, Sade said with a cruel grin. Did you hear? The king himself has commanded us to sing for the prince. Maybe you should stay at home. Your voice will scare him away. The other girls roared with laughter, clapping their hands and mimicking the way Tolani walked. Some even broke into a mocking song. Bushmeat, bushmeat, singing in the dark. Bushmeat, bushmeat, stay hidden with your mark. Tolani's heart twisted like cloth wrung tightly in water. She lowered her clay pot and walked away, her face burning. She wanted to vanish into the earth, to hide from their eyes forever. At home, she told her mother, I will not go, Mama. Let the beautiful ones sing. I am not worthy to stand before a prince. But Iya Tolani shook her head firmly. My child, the one the world pushes to the ground, God himself will lift up. Do you think your voice was given to you for nothing? Go. Even if you do not sing, go. That night, as the moon shone like silver on the rooftops, Tolani sang again, not loud, not bold, just soft enough to soothe her own heart. She sang of the forest, of hidden rivers, of dreams that refused to die. The prince, pacing the palace courtyard restlessly, stopped dead in his tracks. The voice floated faintly on the night breeze. His chest tightened. It's her again. He turned to his guards. Tomorrow, when the maidens gather, listen carefully. When that voice comes, we will know her. But Tolani, sitting outside her mother's hut, still believed she had no place among the maidens of Oyo. Her smile was broken, her heart fragile. She did not know that destiny was already waiting for her, ready to shock the world that mocked her. And in the palace, whispers grew louder whispers of a strange prince who cared nothing for riches, nothing for beauty, but only for a voice carried by the wind. The sun rose golden over Oyo, its rays spilling across the palace walls like a blessing. Drummers had already taken their places in the great courtyard, their talking drums echoing messages that rode across the town. From every corner of the kingdom, people gathered, women in brightly tied jellies, men in flowing agbadas, children running barefoot with dust clinging to their legs. The palace courtyard swelled with bodies, eyes eager to witness the spectacle. The maidens entered in a line, their beads clinking on their necks and waists, their wrappers shimmering in the sunlight. They were the pride of all your daughters, of chiefs, wealthy traders, and respected farmers. Heads held high, they walked like peacocks across the stage. And then, at the far end, came Tolani. Her wrapper was plain, her hair simply braided, and her shoulders bent as though she were carrying the weight of the whole world. Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Ha! Bushmeat has come!" someone jeered. "She thinks a prince will listen to her croaking voice," another mocked. Even the maidens beside her smirked, whispering to each other. "Let her embarrass herself. The prince will surely laugh." But the prince did not laugh. Seated beside the king, his eyes scanned the line of maidens, his heart pounding. Where is she? Where is the voice that called me through the night? The first maiden stepped forward. She sang a song of praise to the king, her voice bold and clear. The crowd clapped. The second followed, her voice like a river, smooth and confident. Then another and another, each one graceful, each one certain she might be chosen. But with every voice, the prince shook his head. His chest tightened with frustration. No. None of these voices carry the spirit I heard. None of these belong to her. Finally, it was Tolani's turn. Her legs trembled as she stepped forward. She wanted to run, to disappear into the ground. She remembered the girls' laughter at the stream, the cruel songs, the endless mockery. Her throat tightened. Then she heard her mother's voice in her memory, the one the world pushes down. God himself will lift up. She closed her eyes. And she sang. At first, her voice was low, trembling like a bird's wing. But as the melody rose, something ancient stirred within her. The courtyard grew quiet. Her voice swelled, carrying a pain that spoke of rejection, and hope that soared beyond shame. She sang of rivers that never dry, of stars that shine, even when the world ignores them. The drums fell silent. The crowd, once mocking, now held their breath. Even the wind seemed to pause, as though it too was listening. The prince shot to his feet, his eyes wide. "That's it!" he shouted, his voice breaking through the stunned silence. "That's the voice!" Gasps erupted from the crowd. People turned their heads in disbelief. "Bushmeat?" someone whispered. "Impossible!" another scoffed. But the prince moved forward, his gaze locked on Tolani. He stopped before her, his eyes shining with wonder. "What is your name?" he asked softly. Tolani's lips trembled. Tolani, she whispered. The prince smiled, his heart full. Tolani, he repeated, as though the name itself was a song. Then he turned to the king, his voice strong. "Kabiyesi, with all respect, I have found her. This is the one I seek." The courtyard erupted in chaos. Some shouted in anger, others in shock. The maidens who had walked proudly now covered their faces, their pride shattered. The villagers who had mocked Tolani were silenced, their mouths hanging open, and Tolani? She stood frozen, tears spilling down her cheeks. Never in her life had she imagined that the same voice that had once brought her mockery would be the very thing that lifted her above them all. The king, regal and calm, nodded slowly. So be it. If the prince has chosen, then Oyo shall not stand in his way. The stone the builders rejected has indeed become the cornerstone. The drummers struck their drums in thunderous rhythm. The courtiers bowed, and for the first time in her life, Tolani lifted her head high. She was no longer bushmeat. She was the chosen one. The days that followed were like a whirlwind. News spread across Oyo and beyond that the foreign prince had chosen his bride not from the daughters of chiefs or wealthy traders, but from the most unlikely girl of all, Tolani, the skinny one. People gossiped at the markets. The girl they used to call bush meat. Others whispered at the stream. "And how can that be?" Some scoffed, but it was no rumor. The king himself had blessed the union, and the palace drummers beat the message across the kingdom. For Tolani, it all felt like a dream. One morning she was a girl mocked at the stream, and the next she was being clothed in fine aso oak, her hair adorned with coral beads, her arms jingling with bangles. The women of the palace bathed her in fragrant oils, rubbed ori shea butter into her skin, and dressed her as though she had always belonged to royalty. But when she looked into the polished brass mirror, she did not see a queen. She still saw the girl who had once hidden her face in shame. Tears pricked her eyes. The prince entered quietly, his gaze soft as it fell on her. "Why do you cry, Tolani?" he asked. She shook her head, her voice trembling. "I am not worthy. They mocked me all my life. They called me names. How can I now stand as queen?" The prince stepped closer, lifting her chin with gentle hands. "Do not let their words define you. They saw only what was outside. I heard what was within the voice that carried your soul. That is your crown, Tolani. That is your majesty." His words sank deep into her heart, and for the first time, she believed them. The wedding was a sight that Oyo had never seen before. The palace courtyard overflowed with people, drummers beating furiously, singers raising their voices in praise, dancers stomping their feet in celebration. The air smelled of roasted meat, palm wine, and spices as joy filled every corner. The maidens who had once laughed at Tolani stood among the crowd, their eyes heavy with shame. They could not hide from the truth. The girl they had mocked, the girl they had called bushmeat, now sat on the throne beside a prince. When Tolani entered the courtyard, dressed in royal robes of deep indigo and gold, the crowd gasped. She was radiant, her skin glowing under the sun, her head held high. No trace of the broken girl remained. The king raised his staff and declared, "From this day forward, let it be known that Tolani, once despised, is now honored. She who was mocked shall now be celebrated. May her reign be blessed." The crowd roared in approval, and even those who had once mocked her bowed their heads. Later that night, when the celebration quieted and the stars stretched across the sky, Tolani stepped out into the courtyard. She sang once more, not for the crowd, not for the prince, but for herself. Her voice soared into the night, strong and beautiful, carrying her story into the heavens. And as her song drifted across Oyo, people paused to listen. No one mocked, no one laughed. They only stood in silence, letting her voice wash over them like healing rain. Years later, whenever the story of Queen Tolani was told, mothers would hush their children and say, "Never mock another, for you do not know what crown heaven has prepared for them." And in Oyo, Tolani's name was no longer bushmeat. It was majesty. Thanks so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notification post so that you don't miss out on next amazing story.